In this lesson, we will talk about one of the 4 question types you'll encounter on the integrated reasoning section of the executive assessment, the 2-part analysis. So let's begin by just discussing the structure and logistics of these question types. First, you're going to assume that 3 to 4 of the 12 question integrated reasoning section problems are going to be 2-part analysis. And you're going to always have a single slide containing a quantitative or verbal scenario to evaluate when you're working with a 2-part analysis question type. You're going to always have to make 2 selections per slide, hence the term 2-part analysis, and as is the case with every integrated reasoning style question, you have to get both parts correct for credit on that slide. Now, strategically, we know that these 2-part analyses questions tend to take a little bit longer on average than, say, some of the simpler graphic interpretation and table analysis questions. So you want to allocate about 3 minutes per slide on average for these 2-part analyses questions, but have a hard maximum of 4 minutes for any 2-part analysis question slide. You will also want to engage with the question task in the subject of the slide first before going into the slide and figuring out what the pertinent information is. And that's largely because you're going to have to determine what quantitative or verbal tactics are applicable to the problem, because it can be either a problem-solving style quantitative scenario you have to evaluate, or it can be a critical reasoning or reading comprehension style verbal scenario you have to evaluate. So you want to make sure you're certain of what you need to do before you start working through the problem in order to maximize efficiency. And this is the primary question type within the integrated reasoning section to skip and guess if you're behind pace. Remember, we're supposed to be spending somewhere between 12 to 15 minutes on the first half of the section in the integrated reasoning section of the executive assessment, and ideally 15 to 18 minutes for the second harder half of the integrated reasoning section, provided that you've done well on the first half. So if you are behind pace and if you haven't already sacrificed 2 questions in that first half, you might look at a longer 2-part analysis scenario as an opportunity to gain back time and make sure that you're not going over that 15-minute limit and are getting closer to that 12-minute target for the first half. Now, let's take a look at a sample problem-solving style 2-part analysis, and it's going to have the same approach broadly as what our standard problem-solving style question would be in the quantitative section, with the exception of there is a calculator here, so you can use that to help with some of the mental math to avoid having to complete excess calculations. So, first you're going to set up your scratch pad listing the choices vertically A through F, and I probably would write out the numbers in conjunction with that because they're simple values, 5, 6, 10, 12, 24, and 30 here. Then, of course, we skip to the end of the problem to identify the sought value and label the choices as such. In this case, it's going to be the values of A and B for the 2 friends to travel a combined 80 kilometers. Now, I don't know what that means yet. I'm going to have to start at the beginning, but I understand that that's going to save me reading it once and then reading it again immediately following if I just figure out what I'm being asked for at the outset. So now we're going to read from the beginning, taking notes and completing needed steps as we go. So first we see that Abby cycles 500 meters in A minutes. So since we're translating to kilometers, I'm just going to make that kilometers right now. I know that Abby's going to go 1 kilometer in 2 A minutes. Then we get Barry. He cycles 800 meters in B minutes. And again, I need to convert that to a kilometer metric, so that's going to be 0.8 kilometers in B minutes, and that's going to be 1 kilometer in 1.25 B minutes. And again, I could just divide 1 by 0.8 using the calculator here because it's present to figure out what my 1 kilometer rate is going to be for Barry. Then we keep reading. We see that Abby is going to cycle faster than does Barry, so Abby's rate is faster than Barry's rate. If they each cycled at least 10 hours at their respective constant rates, okay, that's just telling me that, they keep going long enough for the scenario to play itself out. Which of the following values would result in the 2 friends cycling 80 kilometers total? So we need to go 80 kilometers in a total of 8 hours, and we know that our combined rate here is going to be 10 kilometers per hour for the 2 in total. So now, we look to our best tactic in the moment. And here we've got a question seeking a specific numeric value with real number in the choices in ascending order. So this is a back solving set of clues, and we note that maybe we could just plug in a value and see what happens for the situation. So we'll start with A because that's Abby and A comes before B. So we'll pick a middle remaining choice and we'll go with 10 because again, that's easy number. So if it takes 10 minutes for Abby to go 500 meters, it's going to take 20 minutes for Abby to go 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer. So that means that she's going to go 3 kilometers per hour for Abby. But if that's the case, and Abby's supposed to be the faster of the two people, well, it doesn't work because Abby's rate has to be greater than 5 kilometers per hour since she's going to be the faster person per the conditions of the problem in order for them to reach a combined 10 kilometers per hour. So that means that we know she can't go 10 kilometers per hour. And she also can't go 6, 12, 24, or 30 as well because those are all going to be too slow. Because even if she goes 6 minutes for 500 meters, that's going to be 12 minutes for 1,000 meters, which means that she goes 1 kilometer every 12 minutes, which would be 5 kilometers in 60 minutes or in 1 hour. So 5 kilometers per hour does not allow her to go fastest. So that means that A has to be 5 and Abby's rate has to be 6 kilometers per hour. And that means that Barry's rate is going to have to be 4 kilometers per hour. So now we can use that to set up a little bit of technical math for Barry's solution. So we know that 4 kilometers per hour means 1 kilometer for every 15 minutes for Barry. And we remember that Barry traveled 1 kilometer in 1.25b minutes. So 15 minutes is going to be equal to 1.25b. And this is going to be equal to 5/4 b. You can either just divide 15 minutes by 1.25 using the calculator, or you can use your mental math skills that you're going to cultivate through the quantitative section to go, well, 15 times 4 is going to be 60. 60 divided by 5 is going to be 12. And that's our sought 4 kilometers per hour for Barry. So our answers are 5 is our A minutes for Abby and 12 is our B minutes for Barry. And you can see there's a lot of steps. That's often the case with these two-part analysis problems. But if you use one of our alternative tactics from the quantitative section, you can cut a relatively time-consuming problem down to size, do it in that 3, maybe a little bit more than 3 minutes time frame that we know we allocate for these usually more complex problems in the integrated reasoning section. So now let's take a look at the other style. This is our verbal reasoning example. So again, I've got to read the question task first. So if each of the above statements are true, select one statement that must be true about the you pick and one that must be false based on the information provided. So I would probably say that you're better off to read the whole thing up front and then engage with the questions and track whether something is guaranteed to be true based on the statements or guaranteed to be false. So we'll start at the beginning. The U-Pick of Western Alaska recount different reasons for starting a war, a boy's game of darts gone terribly wrong, a deceitful murder during a seemingly companionable hunting trip. What followed is handed down in stories of many fierce battles with arrows flying and tales of the tough and wily warriors who could withstand them. Bow and arrow warfare was widely prevalent among the U-Pick up to about 1800 and did not end until Russians came to Alaska at the beginning of the 19th century. The U-Pick tales of these violent confrontations have been kept alive for hundreds of years through careful retellings by the elders. They are considered reliable histories, unchanged since the first written accounts by non-natives. Okay, not a terribly lengthy reading comprehension passage, but there's a lot of little details in here. And we remember that with inference, and this is illustrated more in our critical reasoning discussion and our reading comprehension discussion in these lessons, we have to make sure we stick to things that are guaranteed to be true or guaranteed to be false when addressing inference. So if something is possible but not certain, that's not going to be our answer. If something is extreme, that's not going to be our answer. So we start with our very first statement. The Russians were the first non-natives to encounter the U-Pick. Well, we see that Russians came to Alaska at the beginning of the 19th century, but that doesn't mean that they were the first non-natives to encounter the U-Pick. So that's not necessarily true. But if we move further down and look at the second choice, the U-Pick kept extensive text accounts of terrible battles. We discover that the U-Pick tales were kept alive through careful retelling of the elders. They are considered reliable histories, unchanged since the first written accounts by non-natives. So the non-natives kept the written accounts, not the UPIC. So the UPIC keeping extensive text accounts of terrible battles, that must be false based on this set of statements alone. Then, war was a common occurrence within UPIC factions. This is really, really challenging because we did have discussions about violent confrontations, bow and arrow warfare, and we said that the UPIC, there were prevalent warfare up to about 1800, but we don't know about within UPIC factions. That phrasing specifically, we need more details, so we can't say that's true nor false. But then, foreign incursion forced the UPIC to change some conventions. Well, we discover bow and arrow warfare was widely prevalent among the UPIC up to about 1800. It did not end until Russians came to Alaska. Well, the Russians would be the foreigners coming into Alaska, and that foreign incursion did make them to stop their bow and arrow warfare, so that would be something that is guaranteed to be true based on the information provided. And then the last statement, Alaska was not the original homeland of the UPIC. Again, we basically pick up around 1800. We can't make any sort of inferences absolute about what was or was not the original homeland of the UPIC. So you'll want to take notes and make sure you scratch out on your scratch pad what your answers are. So you're using your X, you're using your squiggle, you're using your check mark. Be very deliberate with these questions, but this is a perfect example of the kind of problem that you might sacrifice for time if you're behind pace in the integrated reasoning section, because it's just a lot of detail. You have to read very carefully, make defined inferences, and it's just really going to be a time-consuming endeavor. So let's talk about the processes that we just went through. First, we have to read and identify the question task to determine which verbal or quantitative tactics are applicable to that specific problem. Then we need to read what we need to address the question task. So read carefully to note the problem solving or verbal details as they're required. Then step 3 is to execute those proper quantitative or verbal processes. Diligently perform your steps to avoid traps and to maximize efficiency by just doing things once. And remember to use the provided calculator if it's warranted, because you don't have to do the mental math in this section, whereas you do for the quantitative. Then always confirm that you're making progress to a solution. So allow a maximum of a single column read, recalculate, or tactical reset for any two-part analysis question, because like for that UPIC example we just saw, if you go back and forth with answer choices more than once, that's just a clear indicator I have to move on. And remember, because of the unique format of the executive assessment, you can return to the question you're working on later in the half as long as your pacing is going to allow it. So make sure you don't get stuck here and stick to one calm reread, recalculate, or reset before you at least move on to see everything else in the half. And do consider this the primary format to estimate, eliminate, guess, and move on in under 30 seconds on, to gain in your section pacing if you're not quite at that 12 to 15 for the first half pace and 15 to 18 for the second half pace. So these are our two-part analysis steps. Let's go over to the whiteboard, look at one more example together to see them in action. As is the case with all of our two-part analysis questions, always skip to the end and figure out what you're being asked for. So in this case, we're being asked, provided that each of the above statements is true, select one technician and one marketer who cannot be selected for the committee simultaneously. So we need to find a T and an M that cannot be both picked. So I know I've got to deal with my T's and my M's here, and whatever that means. And I probably do want to set up as a shorthand a little matrix here to keep track. So I've got R, P, D, G, T, V here, and we've got our marketers and we've got our technicians. So we'll start by taking notes at the very beginning now. So a 4-person committee, so we're going to pick 4 people. So committee equals 4, and we've got our 8 coworkers. So our coworkers is equal to 8. And then we've got our technicians. So we know we've got our techs, and those are going to be PSVT. Now this is going to help me with my evaluation already, because I know that I've got to pick one marketer and one technician. So if a person is a technician, they can't be the marketer. So I know that T can't be picked as the marketer. I know that V can't be picked as the marketer. I know that P can't be picked as the marketer. And I know that S is basically irrelevant to the entire question. So just cross things out as you go. Then we keep moving through the problem. We learn that the three marketers, and I'll just use a little shorthand of MKTS for marketers, those are going to be D, G, and R. So again, similar to what we just did previously, we know that R can't be our technician. We know that D can't be our technician, and G can't be our technician. So just keep on crossing them out, and I can see that at least I can make an educated decision already. Now, then we get one more piece of information about our categorization. We've got one middle manager, so we'll just call our manager our Marge. And we know that our committee of 4 people, and we'll put out spots for those selections, has to have one of each of the employee types. So we've got to have a manager, we've got to have a marketer, we've got to have a technician, and then we basically have a wild card. And we already know that our manager has to be Marge, so Marge is going to fit into that manager spot. Then we get to the last bit, which is that if Tevin is on the committee, and Tevin is a tech, so if we get T as a technician on the committee, then we know we have to have G as a marketer on the committee. But we have to think about what the opposite would be, which is that if G is not on the committee, then T can't be on the committee either. Then we find out that if V is not on the committee and V is a technician, then R is not on the committee and R is my marketer. So we'll cross out R. But if we have R in the committee, so if R is our marketer, then we're guaranteed to get V as our technician as well. So now we just have to think about how we're going to end up with more people than we want on this committee. So we look at the people that are relevant. So if we were to put T into the committee, T would have to be our technician or the wild card. And if T goes in, then we've got to have a G. But then if we put R into the committee as our wild card, well, then we know that we're supposed to have V2, and I don't have enough spots for that to happen. So that means we can't have T and R on the committee at the same time. So R is the marketer that we can't select, and T is the technician that we can't select. So these types of problems are kind of little logic games to a degree, and you just have to take the notes down. Make sure you work through all of the pieces. Don't get bogged down on what you don't know with two-part analysis, whether it's this kind of unique little logic chain kind of question or any other type of two-part analysis. Focus on what they tell you, work through the problem, get over the initial like what is happening feeling, and you might discover that it's not nearly as difficult as it initially seems. So go ahead and do some more practice of your own with these types of questions in our online database and potentially at the GMAC website as well to get better at this type of integrated reasoning question in advance of your attempt at the official executive assessment.